It was supposed to be another light late-night interview. A beloved actress, a charismatic host, a polished studio audience ready to laugh on cue. But somewhere between the jokes and the applause, something shifted. The smiles tightened. The pauses grew longer. And for a brief moment on live television, it felt like Jennifer Garner wished she had never taken that chair across from Stephen Colbert. Before we break down what happened and why that appearance still sparks discussion, make sure you're subscribed to Prime Talk, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because moments like this, the subtle ones, the unscripted ones, are where live television reveals its real power. On the surface, nothing about the booking seemed unusual. Garner was promoting a project. Colbert was doing what he does best, blending humor with sharp curiosity. The setting was familiar, the iconic Ed Sullivan Theatre stage, home of The Late Show. The lighting was warm, the band energetic, the crowd enthusiastic. It was the kind of environment designed to make celebrities feel safe. But live television has one rule. Once you sit down, there's no escape from the moment. Jennifer Garner had long cultivated an image of warmth and authenticity. From her breakout role on Alias to her steady presence in film and family-focused content, she became known not just as an actress, but as someone approachable, relatable, genuine. She laughed easily in interviews. She told self-deprecating stories. She leaned into awkwardness rather than resisting it. Stephen Colbert, on the other hand, built his reputation on intelligence wrapped in humor. His interview style can be playful, but it often carries an undercurrent of depth. He listens closely. He pivots quickly, and when he senses something interesting beneath the surface, he doesn't always let it slide. That dynamic, warmth meeting wit, can either create magic or discomfort. When Garner walked onto the stage that night, the audience welcomed her with loud applause. She smiled broadly, waved, and embraced Colbert. They exchanged pleasantries. The conversation started light, focusing on her current work and the routines of daily life. She told stories with animated gestures. Colbert leaned back, nodding, occasionally interjecting with a clever aside. It felt safe, familiar, controlled. But interviews are rarely just about promotion. They are about narrative, and narratives have context. At the time of her appearance, Garner's public life had been under intense scrutiny. Her high-profile marriage and subsequent divorce from fellow actor Ben Affleck had been dissected by media outlets for years. Although both had spoken respectfully about one another, the public fascination never fully faded. Garner, in particular, was often portrayed as the steady, grounded figure amid turbulence. She rarely addressed personal matters directly in interviews. When she did, she chose her words carefully. She maintained composure. She kept the focus on co-parenting and privacy. Colbert knew that. His audience knew that. And that's what made the shift in tone so noticeable. About halfway through the conversation, Colbert began steering the discussion toward resilience, how public figures handle difficult chapters in life. It was framed broadly at first. Professional challenges, balancing motherhood and career, the pressures of being in the public eye. Garner responded thoughtfully. She spoke about gratitude, about learning, about keeping perspective. Then came the question. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't aggressive. It was delivered calmly, almost gently. But it cut closer to the bone than anything that had been said before. For a split second, Garner's expression changed. The smile paused mid-curve. Her eyes shifted downward. Her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Live television does not allow for editing out micro-expressions. The audience grew quieter, not dramatically, but enough that you could feel the air tighten. Colbert held his gaze, waiting. Garner inhaled. That moment, that breath, would later become the clip that circulated online. Not because of what was said, but because of what was visible. The calculation, the decision, the awareness that millions were watching. This wasn't a scandal. There were no raised voices, no walk-offs, no explicit confrontation. But sometimes exposure isn't loud. Sometimes it's a question that corners you emotionally in real time. Garner answered. Carefully, respectfully. She reframed. She redirected. She maintained grace. But something had shifted. The rhythm was no longer effortless. The laughter, when it returned, sounded slightly thinner. Colbert, to his credit, didn't press aggressively. He let the answer stand. He moved forward. The band eventually played them to commercial break. On paper, the interview was a success. No controversy. No headlines screaming outrage the next morning. And yet viewers sensed something deeper had occurred, a crack in the polished facade of late-night comfort. Because when celebrities agree to live interviews, they accept a risk. They trust the host. They trust the structure. But they also know that a single question, asked at the right moment, can change the temperature of the room instantly. Why did that particular exchange resonate so strongly with viewers? Why did so many people replay that clip, analyzing Garner's body language and tone? And what exactly was behind Colbert's line of questioning? The answers aren't explosive. They are subtle. And that subtlety is what makes this moment worth examining. Jennifer Garner did not storm off the set. Stephen Colbert did not ambush her unfairly. But somewhere between professionalism and vulnerability, a boundary was tested. And once that boundary was crossed, even briefly, there was no rewinding it. Because in live television, the most powerful exposures are rarely dramatic. They are quiet. They happen in the space between a question and an answer. And what happened next would quietly redefine how viewers interpreted that entire conversation. In order to understand why that pause mattered, you have to step back and look at the months leading up to that night. By the time Jennifer Garner took her seat across from Stephen Colbert, she was no stranger to public scrutiny. For decades, her career had unfolded in front of cameras, first as an action star on Alias, then as a romantic lead in studio films, later as a producer and entrepreneur. But alongside the professional milestones, her personal life had become a permanent fixture of entertainment coverage. Her marriage to Ben Affleck had been one of Hollywood's most talked-about relationships. Their separation and eventual divorce were covered exhaustively, often with a tone that cast Garner as the steady, resilient parent navigating turbulence with quiet dignity. She rarely contradicted that narrative. When asked about her family, she emphasized co-parenting and respect. When asked about heartbreak, she leaned into growth and gratitude. That restraint shaped her public image. She became associated with composure. In interviews, she was known for self-awareness and humor. She told stories about motherhood mishaps. She laughed at herself. She embraced awkwardness in a way that made audiences feel protective of her. That relatability became part of her brand. But relatability can also create expectation. Viewers begin to feel they know you. Hosts begin to assume you're comfortable sharing. And the line between personal and promotional slowly blurs. Stephen Colbert, meanwhile, had refined his interview style over years of live broadcasting. On The Late Show, he balanced sharp political commentary with personable celebrity conversations. He could pivot from satire to sincerity within seconds. His strength wasn't confrontation in the traditional sense, it was curiosity. He asked questions that sounded conversational but often carried emotional weight. And unlike pre-taped interviews, his show operates live. That distinction matters. In live television, there's no safety net. No opportunity to trim an answer. No way to soften a reaction after the fact. Every hesitation becomes part of the broadcast record. When Garner booked the appearance, the purpose was straightforward: promote her latest project and connect with viewers. The tone of her press tour leading up to that interview had been light. She focused on work, family routines, and personal growth. She avoided dwelling on old headlines. But there was context in the air. In the months prior, public attention had once again drifted toward her past relationship. Affleck's personal life was back in headlines. Photos circulated. Commentary resurfaced. Social media reignited debates about who handled what better, who seemed happier, who appeared more composed. Garner did not publicly engage in that discourse. She stayed quiet. Silence, however, often invites speculation. By the time she appeared on Colbert's stage, audiences weren't just interested in her new project. They were curious about her perspective. How did she truly feel about the way the past had unfolded? Did she ever resent the media framing? Did she regret anything? Late-night hosts are aware of that curiosity. They sense what the audience wants, even when it isn't explicitly said. Colbert began the interview comfortably enough. They joked about parenting. They discussed daily routines. He asked about balancing career and family. Garner responded warmly, describing chaos in a way that felt charming rather than burdensome. But gradually, the questions deepened. Colbert shifted toward resilience, how people rebuild after difficult chapters. It was framed in universal terms at first. He spoke about public life being challenging, about how narratives can take on a life of their own. Garner agreed. She spoke about learning to tune out noise. She emphasized gratitude for her children. She kept her answers broad. Then Colbert gently narrowed the lens. He referenced how public perception can paint someone as either hero or victim. He asked whether she ever felt boxed into a storyline she didn't choose. It was subtle, not accusatory, not invasive in wording, but it was personal. For someone who had carefully avoided reframing her past in interviews, that line of questioning required a decision. Does she push back? Does she clarify? Does she keep it general? Body language experts later pointed out that before answering, Garner adjusted in her seat. She tucked her hair behind her ear, a small grounding gesture. Her smile flickered, then returned. To the casual viewer, it may have seemed like a normal pause. But to those familiar with her interview rhythm, it was different. She usually responded instantly, enthusiastically. This time, she measured her words. Live television compresses time. A 2-second silence can feel like 10. Colbert didn't interrupt. He let the space breathe. That silence created tension not because the question was scandalous, but because it nudged against a boundary Garner had long maintained. She does not publicly relitigate her personal life. The audience sensed the shift. Applause died down faster than usual. Laughter became tentative. Garner eventually answered in a way that redirected the narrative. She spoke about personal accountability, about not seeing herself as a victim of circumstance. She said growth requires accepting your role in your own story. It was a thoughtful response, one that maintained dignity without feeding speculation. But it wasn't the breezy storytelling tone from earlier in the segment. Something had changed in the energy of the room. Colbert nodded, listening intently. He didn't challenge her. He didn't push for specifics. But the fact that the topic had been broached at all was significant. Because once a question is asked live, even gently, it becomes part of the public conversation. The rest of the interview continued, but the tempo had shifted. Garner laughed, yet her posture remained slightly more reserved. The conversation returned to professional topics, but viewers couldn't unsee the moment of recalibration. In retrospect, nothing overtly dramatic happened. No raised voices. No uncomfortable joke gone wrong. No viral meltdown. And yet, online discussion afterward focused almost entirely on that exchange. Not for what was said, but for what was almost said. That's the paradox of live television. Sometimes exposure isn't about revealing secrets. It's about revealing humanity, the visible effort it takes to stay composed when a question lands closer to home than expected. Leading up to that appearance, Garner had maintained control of her narrative with remarkable consistency. But on that stage, under those lights, she faced a live moment that required immediate emotional navigation. And when the conversation edged toward territory she typically keeps private, the calculation was visible. The real tension wasn't between host and guest. It was between public persona and private experience. And the next few minutes would determine whether that balance held steady or tipped in a way neither of them anticipated. The moment itself didn't arrive with a dramatic warning. There was no shift in lighting, no sudden change in tone from the band, no audible gasp from the crowd. It unfolded quietly, in the middle of what still looked like a composed and friendly conversation. Stephen Colbert leaned slightly forward in his chair. His hands were loosely clasped, his posture attentive rather than confrontational. He had just finished asking about resilience, about how people grow through highly public chapters of their lives. Jennifer Garner nodded as he spoke, her expression open. Then he asked the question that subtly altered the atmosphere. He didn't mention names. He didn't reference headlines directly. Instead, he framed it in a way that made it both universal and personal at the same time. He asked whether she ever felt that the public had written a version of her story that didn't fully match her own truth, and whether carrying that version had ever been heavy. It was delivered calmly. His tone was measured. There was no accusation embedded in the wording. But the subtext was unmistakable. For a fraction of a second, Garner's expression froze. The smile that had been resting easily on her face held in place, but her eyes shifted downward. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle enough that casual viewers might have missed it. Then came the pause. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. On live television, silence stretches. She inhaled slowly. Her shoulders lifted almost imperceptibly and then settled. One hand moved to adjust her hair behind her ear, a grounding gesture. Her other hand tightened slightly around her knee before relaxing again. The audience, sensing the shift, quieted. Colbert did not interrupt. He didn't rush to fill the space with a joke. He maintained eye contact, waiting. Garner finally began to answer. She started carefully, acknowledging that when you live any portion of your life publicly, people will form narratives. She spoke evenly, choosing each word with visible deliberation. Her voice was steady, but no longer animated. She said that sometimes those narratives are incomplete. Sometimes they simplify complicated situations. But she emphasized that she tries not to see herself as defined by what's written or said. There was a brief flicker of a smile, smaller this time, restrained. She continued, explaining that growth comes from focusing inward rather than outward. That assigning blame publicly rarely helps anyone heal. That privacy, especially when children are involved, matters deeply to her. The room remained quiet. Colbert nodded thoughtfully. He listened without interruption, allowing her full answer to land. When she finished, there was applause, polite, supportive, but softer than the earlier laughter. He followed up gently, asking whether maintaining that boundary has ever felt isolating. Again, the question was not aggressive, but it pushed 1 inch further. Garner's posture straightened. She crossed her legs in the opposite direction, a small repositioning that signaled recalibration. This time, her answer was shorter. She acknowledged that it can feel lonely at times, that choosing not to correct every public assumption requires discipline. But she reiterated that some parts of life are meant to remain personal. There was no defensiveness in her tone, only firmness. For viewers at home, the tension wasn't explosive, it was emotional. The exposure wasn't about scandal. It was about witnessing someone navigate a boundary in real time. The most telling moment came not during her words, but immediately after. Colbert gave a slight nod and let a beat pass before shifting the conversation back toward her current project. The pivot was smooth, professional. But the air in the room felt different. When the band's laughter cue returned during the next lighter exchange, it sounded louder than before, almost as if the audience was eager to restore levity. Garner smiled again. She laughed at a self-deprecating comment. But the rhythm of the interview had changed. Earlier, her stories flowed freely, punctuated by quick back-and-forth banter. Now, there was a measured quality to her responses. At one point, she glanced briefly toward the audience during a joke, then back to Colbert, as if recalibrating her comfort level. The cameras captured everything. The close-ups made the pauses visible. The lighting left no shadows to hide behind. There were no commercial breaks to regroup mid-answer. No opportunity to request a retake. The exchange existed exactly as it unfolded. That's what gave it weight. Had the same question been asked in a print interview, her response might have been edited for clarity. Had it been pre-taped, producers might have trimmed the silence. But live television preserves hesitation. Colbert never appeared hostile. His expression remained empathetic. He didn't interrupt her answers. He didn't press for specifics about names or events. He allowed her to define the scope of the conversation. Yet the fact remained. He had taken the discussion into territory she rarely entered publicly. As the segment approached its end, the energy stabilized. They shared one final laugh about parenting chaos. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Colbert thanked her warmly for being there. She stood, embraced him, and waved to the crowd. From a distance, it looked like a successful late-night appearance. But viewers who had been watching closely could identify the pivot point. That question, that pause, that recalibration. It wasn't a clash. It wasn't a humiliation. It was a moment where the mask of effortless charm slipped just enough to reveal the effort beneath it. And in live broadcasting, even a slight shift can echo. As the band played her offstage and the cameras cut to commercial, what lingered wasn't controversy. It was curiosity. Did she feel blindsided? Did she expect the conversation to go there? Or was this simply the inevitable reality of sitting across from a host known for thoughtful depth? The exchange lasted less than 5 minutes. But sometimes 5 minutes are enough to change how an entire interview is remembered. And once the clip began circulating online, that subtle pause would become the focal point of a much larger conversation. When the cameras cut to commercial, the applause inside the Ed Sullivan Theatre was steady, professional, supportive. But the energy had undeniably shifted. What began as a light promotional appearance had quietly transformed into something more revealing. Not explosive, not hostile, just real. Jennifer Garner smiled as the segment wrapped, embracing Stephen Colbert before walking offstage. To anyone glancing casually at the television, it looked like another successful late-night booking. But live audiences are perceptive. They feel subtle tension. They notice when laughter takes an extra second to arrive. Backstage, there were no public reports of confrontation. No statements issued. No visible fallout between guest and host. That's important. This was not a feud. It was not an ambush in the dramatic sense. But it was a moment where emotional boundaries were tested on live television. Within hours, clips from the interview began circulating online. Viewers replayed the pause. They slowed down the footage. They analyzed Garner's expression frame by frame. Social media discussions didn't accuse Colbert of wrongdoing, but many questioned whether the question had pushed too close to territory she clearly prefers to keep private. Others defended the exchange, pointing out that Colbert's tone remained respectful throughout. They noted that he never named individuals, never pressed for sensational detail, and allowed Garner to answer on her own terms. From a journalistic standpoint, the question fell within the boundaries of thoughtful inquiry. From a human standpoint, it exposed how delicate live conversations can be. Late-night television occupies a unique cultural space. It blends entertainment with introspection. Hosts like Stephen Colbert have built careers on asking meaningful questions in unexpected settings. His audience expects more than surface-level banter. They expect depth. But depth requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, when unplanned, can feel uncomfortable. For Garner, the long-term impact wasn't career damage or public backlash. She continued working steadily. Her projects moved forward. Her public image remained largely intact. However, that interview subtly reframed how audiences viewed her composure. It reminded viewers that maintaining grace in public requires constant calculation. It also highlighted something larger about celebrity culture: the expectation that public figures owe audiences emotional access. Garner has historically chosen restraint. She doesn't use interviews to revisit personal history for dramatic effect. That boundary has been consistent. On that night, viewers witnessed the effort behind maintaining it. Colbert, for his part, handled the aftermath professionally. He did not reference the exchange in a sensational way on later broadcasts. There were no follow-up jokes at her expense. The moment was allowed to stand on its own. In many ways, that restraint prevented escalation. Media coverage in the following days described the exchange as tense but respectful. Headlines focused on the pause rather than the content of her answer. Commentators noted her measured response as an example of composure under pressure. And that's where the cultural significance lies. In an era where viral talk show moments often involve confrontation, shouting, or walk-offs, this instance stood out for being quiet. It demonstrated that exposure doesn't always require aggression. Sometimes it's simply the act of asking a thoughtful question in a live setting and allowing silence to reveal what it will. The clip continues to resurface in discussions about memorable late-night interviews because it captures something authentic. Not scandal. Not conflict. Authenticity. Jennifer Garner did not lose control. She did not attack the host. She did not shut down the conversation. She navigated it. But the visible pause showed viewers that even seasoned actors experience unscripted emotion when personal lines are approached. That's what made it compelling. Live television remains one of the last formats where unpredictability is preserved. Pre-recorded interviews can be polished. Social media posts can be curated. But on a live stage, under bright lights, with millions watching, reaction time is measured in heartbeats. For aspiring performers and media professionals, the moment serves as a case study. It shows how hosts balance curiosity with responsibility. It shows how guests maintain dignity under pressure. And it reveals how audiences respond not just to words, but to silence. Looking back, did Jennifer Garner regret going on Stephen Colbert's show? There's no public statement suggesting she did. But viewers could see that for a brief moment, she was forced to navigate deeper waters than expected. And that navigation became the story. It's a reminder that exposure doesn't have to be loud to be impactful. It can be measured in a breath, in a glance downward, in the decision to answer carefully rather than react impulsively. That's why this moment still matters today. It reflects the evolving nature of celebrity interviews. It reflects the thin line between curiosity and intrusion. And it demonstrates that professionalism on live television is often defined by how gracefully people handle the unexpected. If you appreciate deep dives into real talk show moments like this, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk. Hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know which live interview we should break down next. Because sometimes the most powerful television moments aren't the loudest ones. They are the quiet pauses that reveal everything.